Because if you think about entrepreneurs, they have to be a little bit of a different type of thinker, right? To even think to start a business from scratch. So I think they have a certain level of optimism. But on the flip side of that optimism is sometimes I think we need to be tempered with the reality. And that's why you need to surround yourself from an inclusion standpoint with people who fill in the gaps and complement the skills that you don't have. They bring those skills that you don't have so that you don't have those blind spots.
You're listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with your host, Michael Palmer. Listen each week as inspiring guests share their secrets of success to help you increase your confidence, work smarter, and build a business you love. This episode of The Successful Bookkeeper is brought to you by PureBookkeeping.com, the proven system to grow your bookkeeping business.
Welcome back to the Successful Bookkeeper Podcast. I am your host, Michael Palmer, and today's show is going to be a good one. Our guest is a workplace, diversity, and inclusion expert and author of Intelligence Isn't Enough, a Black professional's guide to thriving in the workplace. Carice Anderson, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael.
Well, it's great to have you. And I mean, it's an interesting book title. I can't wait to get into that and learn more about your book. But before we do that, please tell us about your career journey leading up to this point.
I always describe my career in three parts. I think I may need to add a fourth, but the first part was before I went to business school. I was the first person in my family to major in business and to work in the corporate space. And needless to say, I was pretty clueless in the first, I would say, 6 years of my career. Even though, I had some pretty good brands on my resume. I worked at Arthur Anderson, which used to be one of the big five accounting firms. And then I also worked at Deloitte. And, I went to business school. I went to Harvard Business School for 2 years, came back to Deloitte. And I say that that's kind of the second part of my career. I worked at Deloitte for a couple more years and decided I really wanted to make a change. And so I got into a fellowship program and started working for a public school system. So I worked for Fulton County Schools for 3 years. And then kind of in the midst of ending my time at Deloitte and starting at Fulton County, I started dating my husband, who is a first generation Zimbabwean American, and he was living in South Africa. So we were long distance for 3.5 years. And once we finally got married, I moved to South Africa. And that's where I say the third part of my career really started. While I was in South Africa, I worked at McKinsey and Company. I worked for what I affectionately like to call a start down because it never really started up. And then I ended up ending my time in South Africa. I worked for Corn Ferry. But after I joined the start down, I actually ran my own small business for a couple of years. And I learned a lot during that time. And so I kind of consider that to be like the third phase of my career, that my time spent in South Africa. I lived in South Africa for 10 years.
Wow.
And then I'll say the fourth is now that I've been back since July of last year. I work for a very large asset management firm in the HR space. So that pretty much kind of those four parts really kind of characterize my career over the last 20 plus years.
Wow, that's quite a journey. And when you say, tell me a little bit more about the start down. I don't think I've ever heard that before.
That's a phrase I've coined, Michael. It was basically, a startup that never really got started and that just, pretty much collapsed within a year. I think a lot of that had to do with the character of the people who were leading the organization
Okay.
and the decisions that they made and how they managed the finances. And I think the other part was just, the difficulty in raising money. I think in the environment that we were in, I think, when you're trying to raise money for a business, that can be really, really difficult depending on the sort of the
Super
financial and
difficult.
political
Yeah.
climate. And
Mm-hmm.
I think in light of that, as a business owner, you need to make really good decisions. You need to be smart about how you manage the money that you do have. And I don't think that was always the case with the people that were leading the startup, which I think ultimately led to its downfall.
Definitely. I mean, they probably could have used one of our audience our
Absolutely.
listeners, right? They needed a great bookkeeper, perhaps, but then they might not. If you don't have the right character, you're not going to listen to them anyways. And
Yeah,
I know our
exactly.
listener is probably laughing right now because not all owners listen to good advice and
Absolutely.
end up getting where they're going.
Absolutely.
But yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
the world's a crazy place right now. So there's a lot of start downs, I'm sure,
Mm,
because of all these shifts globally. I mean, what people
right.
wanted and what they were doing just a couple of years ago is very different now, and what investors are looking for, and all of that. It'd be
Yeah.
really stressful. And finances, I mean, that's why I love the work that I do, helping our listener build their business strong so that they can help the many business owners, small, medium sized business owners, not be start downs, but be start up and thrives
Yeah.
up, and, longevity and all that good stuff. Because the finances, when they don't go right,
Oh,
it,
yeah.
and you
It's
saw that
it's
firsthand.
everything. I mean, one thing I'll just add, I think, onto what you're saying is that, you mentioned inclusion when you were introducing me. And I think inclusion also for me is not just about the physical characteristics, but also people who bring a different perspective, people who bring different strengths. Because if you think about entrepreneurs, they have to be a little bit of a different type of thinker, right? To even think to start a business from scratch. So I think they have a certain level of optimism. But on the flip side of that optimism is sometimes I think we need to be tempered with the reality. And that's why you need to surround yourself from an inclusion standpoint with people who fill in the gaps and complement the skills that you don't have. They bring those skills that you don't have so that you don't have those blind spots and no one around to sort of give you a different perspective. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
I love it. It's a great thought, and I experience it myself often. Where early days of starting this business, it's like there's not that many other people around. So get used to doing it myself, making all the decisions. But once a team starts to form and you get other people around you, it's like it becomes a bad habit,
Yeah,
because it not only is it limiting the ideas and the direction and all that good stuff, but it also makes people feel alienated when they're not
absolutely.
involved in some of the decisions. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those things that, as our business has grown, there's more people, and we've talked about this on another podcast when we were talking about some leadership conversations. And yeah, it's really a great insight. But got to have the insight. So there's a lot of business
Mm-hmm.
owners that don't pause enough to realize the impact that they're having on other people, and when they're maybe not including others in decisions and in conversations.
Absolutely.
So quite an interesting journey. I love the start down. We want to prevent, our listener wants to prevent start downs, or work with the people that really have what it takes to, make that startup fly. And so, I'm always curious, you're now, throughout your career, what were some of the big, like, was there a big or standout obstacle that you faced yourself personally when you were growing? I mean, your book is probably filled with examples of that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, kind of goes back to what I was saying just a second ago in terms of being the first person in my family to major in business in university, to the first person to work in a corporate. I think my biggest obstacles were the things that I didn't know. I didn't know what I didn't know. And when I look back on it, some of the messages I was getting growing up was, you're smart. And I was always, I did really well in elementary and high school and college. And so the messages I was getting was, you're smart. All you need is these pieces of paper and you'll be set for life. And I think that was probably the biggest hurdle that I had to overcome, was understanding that that's not enough. And thus the title of my book, Intelligence Isn't Enough. It's not enough to be smart. I know so many smart people, whether it's from, like I said, high school or university or business school or people that I've worked with. And I've seen it happen. People can be super smart, but if you don't have some of those other elements, you don't know how to get along with other people. You don't know how to resolve conflict. You don't know how to lead other people and just, build relationships. You don't know how to read the room and adjust accordingly. Those things will be your downfall, and they will supersede and sort of override all of the great things about you if you don't get those things sort of under control,
Mm.
and even, get them to a place where they're helpful to you. So that was probably my biggest lesson, is just realizing I need other people, and I need to learn how to understand and manage myself, and I need to understand my environment and understand, people are different than me. Like, everybody doesn't think the same way as me. I know it sounds like such a simple it sounds like such an obvious comment, right? But I really had to learn everybody does not have the same goal as me, and that's okay. Everybody, we don't need everybody to be like me. That's that ego part of us, right? That wants everybody to be like us. But I'm like, I need to find the value in the differences. I need to find the value in other people's strengths, because they complement me, and they fill in the gaps that I have. So I'd say those are the two biggest lessons for me, is just that my brain and my degrees are not enough, and that I do need other people.
It's a tough one to get. It took me like a good 40 years to figure it out. So I should have read your book a long time ago. I am curious, the book, when did you decide to write a book?
It's funny you asked that question. I've always been a pretty avid reader. And, I've been reading, I mean, I used to read a lot of autobiographies when I was a kid. I've always just been fascinated about the stories of other people's lives. And I can remember starting to read a book and thinking to myself, how did somebody sit down to a blank piece of paper and write 2, 3, 4, 500 pages? Like, I literally couldn't even conceptualize it until I had an idea that I felt so strongly about. I mean, as I mentioned before, I came out of undergrad in 1998. I graduated from the University of Alabama, Roll Tide. And
Mhm.
I was clueless, like I said, but I didn't know I was clueless. I think, as I've gone through the early probably 10, 12 years of my career, I started to realize, like, ooh, there's some things I really did not know that would have made my life and my career a lot easier. I think it would have helped my trajectory had I known those things. And so fast forward, when I started working in South Africa in 2012, I was working at McKinsey, and I just saw young people, not just at McKinsey, but also just young people that I was encountering that felt a lot like I did in 1998. And I was really surprised, Michael, because, when I graduated from undergrad, the internet was about 5 pages long. You go through it in about 7 minutes, right? It was not a resource.
That's right.
You weren't going to the internet for any answers, right? You're like, we didn't even know what the internet was, at that time. And so fast forward, I'm thinking it's 2012. These young people have the internet, they've got social media, they've got online courses, they've got audio books, like, they have everything and it's at their fingertips. Like, I don't even have to leave the house. And what I realize is, if you don't know what you don't know, you don't even know you should be looking. You don't
Mm.
even know what questions you should be asking. And so I just thought, let me just do a brain dump of everything I wish someone had told me when I was 22, when I was starting my career. And that's really what motivated me to write the book. I just started thinking about the advice that I was giving to people that I worked with, young people that I worked with, and mentees of mine. And that's literally where the book came from. It really was a desire to help young professionals avoid some of the mistakes that I made, so that they could be, their trajectory in their careers could be sharper, and not as slow as mine. And I think on some level, subconsciously, I wanted to give, meaning and purpose to some of my own pain and frustration. I mean, you saw on the first page of my book, I say, my first job out of undergrad, I hated it so much that I wanted to get into a car accident so I didn't have to go to work. And I didn't
Mm.
want to die, but I was just so miserable. And I don't even think it was the company's fault. I think it was just a really bad fit, because I didn't know myself, and I didn't know how to position myself in an organization and in a role that valued what I had to bring to the table. But I didn't want other people to feel that level of misery and that level of frustration. And that's really what motivated me to write the book.
Wow. I absolutely love the backstory of your book. And it just is such a needed book for
Mm,
today. I mean, with all of the young people that are getting into their careers, I mean, the conversations we've had on this podcast with our business owners and their staff and some of the challenges that they have with people that come in that are really smart, but it's not enough.
Absolutely.
And so it's really, really, I think our listener will be thanking you for anyone they hire that's gone and read this book and done the thinking and done the work to get what's needed to actually thrive in the workplace. Because right now I don't know that it's getting worse, but I think the signs of the impacts of the way that it is and the way young people think and the way that they've been brought up, we're starting to hear more and more the impacts that's having in the workplace.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Very cool. And so now the book has there's lots of great stuff in there. I'd love to get into a bit of it, but there's a phrase that you use that you say work in versus working on relationships, which before you answer that, it's one that we use here often when we're talking about building systems in a business. It's like working in your business versus working on your business. So I love that this has a take. I'm thinking it's going to be similar, but I'd love to hear the backstory of that.
You're absolutely right. I mentioned I ran a small business in South Africa for a couple of years. And, we have this terminology in the entrepreneurship world, working in your business versus working on your business. And for those of you that might be listening that aren't familiar with the phrase, so let's say, for example, I ran a cupcake business. So working in my business is I'm buying my ingredients, I'm mixing my cupcakes, I'm delivering them to my customers. Working on my business is taking a step back and saying, should I even be selling cupcakes? Am I selling the cupcakes at the right price point to the right people? Should I expand, my service offering, right, or my product offering? It's asking ourselves those larger questions. And I realized one day this way of thinking could be applied to not only our relationships, but also our careers. So in my book, I say working in versus working on your relationships and versus working in versus on your career. So I think for the relationship aspect, I think we work in our relationships in terms of, so let's say, for example, Michael, you're my manager. I'm going to come to you and we're going to talk about the tasks that need to be done, who needs to do what, the deadline, the resources, the obstacles I'm running into. That's working in my relationship. Working on my relationship is taking a step back and saying, Michael, how are you? Like, what are you trying to achieve? What's keeping you up at night? Who are you as a person? How did you come to be who you are? What were the people and the experiences that shaped you as a person? What are your working preferences? How do you like to be communicated with? It's really trying to understand the people that we work with as opposed to just being so transactional in our interactions. And I guarantee you, the more we can work on our relationships, the more efficient and effective we'll be when we work in our relationships. And that was, so it all came from, that time that I spent as a small business owner. So you were spot on about that.
Beautiful. Well, it's such an interesting take on it. And I'd say I don't think we've talked too much about relationships, working on your relationships. And I think, in a business with staff, it's hugely important, but it's one of those exercises that if you do it for your business, it's going to pay off in your life in general, I'm thinking, because relationships need a lot of work too, generally, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think this is the thing, because when you're a small business owner, I mean, there's so much that you have to do. Your to-do list is ever growing. And I know sometimes it's hard to raise our eyes and our attention from the to-do list so that we can take that time to have that 15-minute coffee chat or that Zoom chat with someone just to connect, right? But I promise you, if you make the sacrifice in the short term, it's going to benefit your business in the long term.
I agree. So, what would be an example of something that I could do to work on my relationships?
One of the things I used to say, this is when, COVID was really rampant and we were all really still at home, is I used to tell people, look, relationships are still being formed. They're still important. You just have to create that space to be able to do that. So if that is, back in the day when we were in the office, you'd run into people at the restroom or the water cooler or the coffee machine and you could strike up a conversation. And I was like, we still need to do that even though we're at home or even though we're on a hybrid, working schedule. Set up those 15 to 20-minute coffee chats and just tell people, look, we're not going to talk about work. I just want to connect with you and see how you're doing and how you're coping with everything that's happening. I think that's one small thing that we can do, and tell people like, hey, you bring some coffee, I'll bring some coffee. But it'll be done virtually, right? But it's still about intentionally and deliberately carving out that time to be able to connect with people and to know who people are. What are your aspirations and your strengths and areas of development, and what motivates you? Where do you see yourself in 5, 10, 15, 20 years? That's the stuff that I think is really, when people know that we care about them as humans and not just worker bees, that is when people will really give us the most, and they will go above and beyond when they know that we're invested in them as people. And I think it builds the trust. Because a professor of mine from business school, she has an equation for trust. She says trust equals authenticity plus empathy plus logic. The authenticity is, are you real? The empathy element is, do you care about me and my success? And then the third element of trust is logic. Are you competent? I think we need to spend more time on that empathy one, as it relates to this conversation. So really showing people I'm taking time out of my schedule just to talk to you as a person. And I just want to know more about you so that that's going to help me in everything I need to do. It's going to help me communicate better with you, lead you better, give you feedback, coach you, whatever it is in terms of our interaction. Because you trust me, because you know I care about you and your success, I think it just makes our whole relationship and our working relationship even better.
I love that. There's no way to get to trust without going deeper into
Absolutely.
some of these things, and that's often where people will just live for so long without ever considering it. And just even when you were talking, like the your relationships aren't done. It's like such a different way of thinking about it. I think as I get older, my mind goes to more fixed state. And it's like, it is the way that it is. I am who I am. It's like, this is the way that it is. The world is the way that it is. But it's such an evolution. Everything's always evolving. It's just my mind that maybe thinks things are fixed. So you could be in a relationship with someone for 40 years, but you still have 20 more years you could shape, or more, let's hope more.
Yeah,
Another 40 years, right?
absolutely.
To
Yeah.
shape that relationship, alter that relationship. And this really comes back to our owners who are running businesses, and not only with their businesses and their staff and team, but also with their clients.
Absolutely.
This is really important thing. So it's like getting down. So I get that an action that our listener could be taking would be just to take a pause and to get away. I know what it's like when I'm working in the day. I'm doing the stuff. I'm working and busy. Trying to be as productive as possible, but my productivity doesn't often have space for doing the things that you're talking about. And that's limiting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, look, it's going to be a sacrifice, because that 15 minutes, you're like, I could have ticked 3 items off my to-do list, but I promise you that investment in your relationships, it will pay off in the long term.
I agree with you. I think this conversation so timely. There's a situation in my life where, there was a communication breakdown, continual communication breakdown. And then we had this opportunity to learn where we learned more about each other, and the communication breakdown went away.
Yep.
And that was it. It's just like, there's a communication breakdown because we don't trust each other.
Mm-hmm.
So a little bit of increase of communication, like it's like, hey, I know who you are in a different way. And it's like, we relate to each other differently. And so
Absolutely.
it's so easy to forget about that when we're doing, like you say, knocking stuff off the to-do list. But those communication breakdowns, those are not productive. Definitely not productive.
Absolutely.
So a little fix,
Absolutely.
15 minutes of that, could save you hours and, lots of
Ex-
glasses of wine. You'd save money on wine.
exactly. And look, think about if you had done that conversation proactively up front. Like as soon as you and this person met, to have that conversation, it would have saved you, like you said, glasses of wine and stress and frustration later, because you already were establishing that relationship and understanding each other. And
That's
one
right.
other thing I will say too is that for anybody that is listening, I have not always believed this. This is the conversion of Carice, because I used to be hardcore, like let's just get it done. I don't have time for people and relationships and all this soft and fluffy stuff. I was like, I've got to mark these items off my to-do list. So this is me, the wiser, older, more mature me, understanding different kinds of people and understanding what's going to yield the greatest long-term impact, not just in the short term, but that long term. And that's so
Mhm.
I just want people to know you can shift how you think about it, if you really invest the time.
So true. And I think your book would be a great place to start.
Yeah, I
I'm
tell
looking.
people all the time, if you're an entrepreneur, give my book to your employees. I promise you, it will make a huge difference.
I love it. I love it. So we're going to make sure that the link to get the book is in our show notes. Of course, we'll talk about where listeners can get it as well as we get towards the end of the conversation. But you talk a little bit about being introverted and maybe struggling with confidence. Is that an area in the book? And what would you say about that introversion versus being extroverted?
Yeah, and it's funny. It's funny that you mention it. I mean, my book originally came out in South Africa last year. I had a publishing deal with a different publisher, and so I've been talking about my book for going on almost 2 years. And that is one of the topics that comes up when I've done a lot of talks for different corporates, is this talk of introversion. And one thing I want my introvert listeners out here to know is that you are not at a disadvantage because you are an introvert. You just do things differently. So for example, extroverts a lot of times are fine going to big events and not knowing anybody. And I think introverts a lot of times prefer smaller settings or one-on-one settings. And so, it's not that you can't build relationships, you just do it in a different way. And so instead of, lamenting that you can't do it like the extrovert, think about, how do I bring my introvert power, my introvert strength, my introvert approach to building relationships. And maybe it is those one-on-one conversations, or those you set up those small group conversations, right? Because that's how you prefer to do it. And so I just wanted people to, and I talk a little bit about extroversion and introversion in my book, but I want my introverts to know you can be just as successful at building relationships as anyone else. You just have to figure out a way to do it that works for you.
I love that. And we have lots of introverts, I mean, in this industry that would say that would think that they're introverted, and that's a whole nother conversation. But we've have had that conversation, and I think it's one that the more you know about yourself, the more powerful you can be. And it's like not changing who you are, but maybe doing different strategies that work better for who you are.
Absolutely. Because I think you'll do much better operating from your natural strengths than you will trying to imitate somebody else. You can be a much better version of you than a than a secondhand version of somebody else. And so I think it's just important for us to lean into who we are, because that is our source of distinctiveness. And I think we're
Mhm.
much more apt to continue to do things if it fits a little bit more naturally with who we are as people.
So true. So true. Much better to just be who we are and be more
Absolutely.
more and more of who we really are every day. That's a good direction to go. So I love that, and that's a big one because it definitely is definitely come up a lot
Yeah.
in this industry. Now, ownership's another conversation that you have. Ownership's of someone's mindset, their brand, their work, relationships, development, career, and culture. They're all key. Tell us a little bit about that.
So that was a concept that I was introduced to when I worked at McKinsey. They're very big on ownership, and I'd never really heard the word used in the way that they use it. And basically, what they mean is that, when I'm working on a client engagement, I'm working on a client deliverable, I need to work and own that engagement and that deliverable as if it was my own problem. So, like I think I mentioned in my book, Michael, if you came to me and said, "Hey, I'm about to be evicted from my apartment," I would do what I could to help you. But if the situation was me getting evicted, oh, I'm going to go above and beyond. Please believe that, right? Because I'm going to be the one that's going to be on the street sleeping, right? If I don't
Mhm.
resolve this issue. And so that's the sense of ownership that McKinsey talks about, is I need to be working and owning this problem as if it were my own. It's not my client's problem. It's not my manager's problem. It's not my teammates' problem. And I think, for the small business owners that are listening to this, if you have people that work for you that are taking that level of ownership of their work, they will go above and beyond because they're not just seeing it like, well, I did what I could and it's not working out. They're going to try they're going to exhaust every possibility to solve that problem, and that's, they're not going to let the slightest obstacle get in their way. They're going to find a way, they're going to figure out a way, and that's what I think is so powerful about the concept of ownership is that, you know, you push through to achieve that result. And those are the kinds of people that you want working for and with you.
So how do we get how I mean maybe it's is can we instill ownership thinking in in another person? How does that, because I mean I think our listener would be, that would be very valuable because
Mm,
it's one of the complaints that I hear often, like someone's not owning their role.
yeah.
It's like they're looking to someone else, say, hey, that's not my thing, it's not my responsibility. So any way that we can cultivate that, I think
Yeah.
is powerful.
I think on the front end, right, we need to be interviewing people to determine if they have a sense of ownership. You know what I mean? As opposed to, I think, hiring people and then trying to figure it out. If we can kind of gauge on the front end, the kinds of behavioral questions that we ask or getting people to tell them about, tell me about a time where you ran into an obstacle. What did you do? Really sort of probing people to see, did they try to exhaust every possibility before they gave up, or were they somebody who, very early in the situation was like threw their hands up? So I think we need to be asking those kinds of questions. If it's people that already work for us, I think there is something about talking to them about what does that ownership mindset look like. And I think sort of, because I definitely think you can help people grow in that space, but I think you have to paint that picture for them if
Mm.
they don't already have it. And then I think, creating those incentives for people to go above and beyond, so that people know I'm going to be rewarded. It's going to be differentiated for me if my performance is better than the person sitting next to me. So I think if we can create some of those incentives and really paint that picture of what ownership looks like, I think the third part might be, let's just make sure our systems and processes don't get in the way of people taking ownership,
Hmm.
that we're disempowering people with some of our processes and systems where it's like everything has to be asked and you got to go through me as the owner for every little thing. Like people can't make any decisions, right? And that's obviously within reason and within the context. But I think giving people a little bit of leeway to be able to demonstrate that ownership so that they can feel that they feel empowered and that they can try to solve some of their own problems.
That's beautiful. I mean, that conversation or question could have taken up a whole podcast. I love how you got all of the answers completely in 3 minutes. It's like, I love that. It's like from, hire the ones with ownership. Here's how you empower the ones in your organization. And here's how you build an organization to empower people to have ownership. I love that.
And I will say one other thing, Try, let me just add this. As an owner, make sure you're showing ownership, right? Because
Mm.
they're not going to be more committed than you are. It's your business. So, I think also leading by example and role modeling that sense of ownership. Do you give up at the first sign of a problem, or do they see you try to push through and exhaust all the possibilities? So I think that's important as well.
So true. So true. And I love that. I think that little piece right there is so important. Some gold in there for our listener as they grow their firm, when they're hiring, and how to have people taking ownership inside their business. I mean, the difference it can make is it's a quantum leap. No doubt about it. Speaking on that, community. You're a believer that someone cannot be successful alone, but need a community. Tell us why has been important to you, and how did you realize that for yourself?
When I look over the course of my career, I was saying at the beginning of our conversation that I thought I could do it alone. I honestly, Michael, I was like, "Psh, I'm smart. I've got these pieces of paper. One I paid a whole bunch of money for. I'm like, I'm set for life. And I realized when you look at successful people, I mean, I mentioned earlier that I've always loved reading autobiographies. The more I reflected on the books that I've read and the stories of people's lives, especially people who've been super successful, they had other people. Whether it's somebody who let them sleep on their couch while they wrote their business plan, or somebody who invested in their business, or somebody who recommended a great employee that ended up working for a business owner, right? You need other people. You really, really do. And I mean, even from an inclusion standpoint, you need other people who bring skills and strengths and experiences and expertise that you do not have. No one person, I don't care who you are, brings everything. You need people around you to help you be successful. And I think for me, as I look back over the course of my life, there have been so many people, and I tried to shout them out in my acknowledgments in my book. The people who have really been critical to my success, who really supported me when I was going through a tough time, folks who mentored me, people who managed me. And, I just think I wouldn't be where I am today without those individuals. And even I dedicated my book to my parents and my grandparents because of their sacrifices. And their faith and their resilience and their determination. I'm able to sit in the seat that I'm in right now. And so, we're communal people. We really, really are. I know there's a lot of isolation in the world because of technology and COVID and all the other things, right, that are going on. But it's like we really are meant to be in community with each other. And I think it's just so important that we cultivate that not only in our personal lives, but also in our businesses and in our careers as well.
That's right. I think we all forget that we are on Starship Earth here. We
Mm,
are in communally living on this
absolutely.
planet together, but sometimes it wouldn't feel that way because
Yeah.
of technology.
Mm,
I agree with this 100%. I mean, the successful bookkeeper is a community. One of the key things that we want to do is help other great bookkeepers connect with great bookkeepers. And that's, like we were talking around your own journey, is being able to connect with people who are moving in the similar direction, can provide you with answers that you might not even have thought about. So valuable. This has been absolutely fantastic. You're delightful to listen to. And I'd love for our listener to know where they can get your book, and then B, if they want to get more content from you or learn more from you, what would be a great way for them to do that as well?
sure. So people can go to Amazon.com to get the
They sell
paperback.
books?
Yes. The paperback, the audiobook, which I actually narrated myself, and the ebook. And if people want to reach out to me, I'm on pretty much all the platforms. I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram under my name, Carice Anderson, or you can go to my website, cariceanderson.com.
Beautiful. Well, we will have all of those links in there, and definitely looking forward to learning more from you in the future. And I just want to thank you on behalf of our listener for your generosity in coming on our show and sharing all of this valuable knowledge that you've collected along your journey.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you. And with that, we wrap another episode of the Successful Bookkeeper Podcast. To learn more about today's wonderful guest and to get access to all sorts of valuable free business building resources, you can go to successfulbookkeeper.com. Until next time, goodbye.
You've been listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with Michael Palmer. For more information and to download the resources mentioned in this episode, please visit us at thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Thank you for listening.